Hey guys, this is Sean here again with you. I just wanted to go over a little bit of a theoretical concept with you, a little bit of theory. And this assumes that you're already familiar with the concept of relative major and relative minor. Well, I feel like there's kind of a unnatural emphasis placed on relative major and relative minor. Let's talk about that in a different set of terms, in different terminology. Let's talk about the major as the Ionian mode of the diatonic scale. So just, major scale, Ionian mode, starting a major scale on the first note. So let's use the term Ionian instead of major. And let's use the term Aeolian instead of minor. So really what we're saying is that we have a relative Ionian to an Aeolian mode and a relative Aeolian to an Ionian mode. And that just means, there we go. And that just means that, you're familiar with this concept already. So if we're playing in C major, the Ionian, the major scale, would just be playing in C major as well. And then, of course, you can play in the relative Aeolian to that. So the Aeolian mode that corresponds to that major scale, that key center, which is going to start on the 6th degree. And rather than counting up 6 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's a lot easier to count downwards. 8, 7, 6. So, of course, you've got A minor as your relative Aeolian. That opens up little fretboard shapes that you might think about in terms of, stuff that you like to play over minor chords and over major chords, like what I did there, sort of a descending groups of 4 thing that I really like doing with minor scale fingerings. That's something that I never really think of doing in a major scale position or a major scale mindset, even though it's physically possible. I never think about doing it that way. I only think about it when I'm in this minor mindset. Right? Okay. So the same way that there is a relative Aeolian to an Ionian and a relative Ionian to an Aeolian, all of the modes, all the natural modes, are relative to each other. So there's nothing particularly intrinsically special about the relationship between relative major and relative minor, relative Ionian, relative Aeolian. You also have a relative mixolydian. So if you are, if you're playing in any given key, you can be playing in a mixolydian feel or a dominant 7 feel, a fifth above that. And that works the same way as playing in a relative minor. So if I start that little C major sample again, so the same way, if you have fretboard shapes, if you have little licks or little things that you enjoy doing in a dominant feel, in a dominant sense, or if you're thinking about the fretboard differently that way, then instead of starting on C and thinking about pretty major scale things, you could start on G and think about dominant stuff. And of course, all the notes are going to be diatonic. All the notes are still going to fit because it's relative. You're just playing the relative mode to a key center. And that's really all the notion of relative major and relative minor is. It's just observing the relation of different modes to a key center. So that's basically the idea. So just be aware that whatever you're playing, if you like to use the concept, if you like to use I hesitate to call it a trick. It's not a trick, but if you if you're hip to relative majors and relative minors, and that's a tool that you use in order to come up with some interesting sounding patterns, some interesting things to play, be aware that you can use all of the modal interrelations the same way. So the same way you've got a relative major, or if you're in a major key, the same way you have a relative minor starting on the 6th of that key. That's A to C major. Well, you've also got a relative Dorian. Can't really think of very much interesting stuff to play Dorian-wise because it's also only a whole tone away from the major key center. So the further away you get, or at least the bigger distances between the different key center feelings that you're using. For instance, if you're using Mixolydian over Ionian, the bigger that distance is, I think kind of the better that sounds, or at least if they're based on chord tone positions. So going to the 3rd note, E, you can get some E Phrygian stuff going. And you get Lydian, 1 step above that, 1/2 step above that. Then you're back to Mixolydian. Then you're back to Aeolian, which is the relative, of course, the relative minor. And something that I really like to do anytime you're in a major key, center, it's really fun to just play around with Locrian stuff without even moving your hand, because the Locrian mode starts on the 7th degree. So you've got that literally 1 fret below your tonic in the major key that you're in. You don't even have to move your hand. So if you're familiar with the Locrian, at least this shape of the Locrian mode, it's very nice and easy to go back and forth. You can play around with arpeggios, go back and forth between that and an Ionian feel. Really kind of fun sounding stuff. Anyways, that's basically it. Thank you for joining me, and have a nice weekend.